Am I in the wrong for not being ready to move in with my boyfriend? The day I met Ryan started like any other ordinary Saturday. It was the tail end of autumn, the streets littered with leaves in various shades of gold and crimson, and a chilly breeze that made me pull my coat tighter around me. I was on my way to meet a friend for brunch, but a sudden downpour had me running for cover. I ducked into the nearest coffee shop, a little place I'd never noticed before, with foggy windows and the rich aroma of roasted beans wafting through the air. It was warm inside, a sharp contrast to the biting cold outside, and the soft hum of conversation filled the cozy space. As I shook off the rain from my umbrella and scanned the room for a free table, my eyes landed on a man sitting alone by the window, his gaze fixed on the world outside. His appearance was striking, a mix of scruffy and sophisticated, with dark hair that fell into his eyes and a stubble that gave him an effortlessly rugged look. He wore a leather jacket that seemed to hug his frame just right, and his fingers tapped absently on the edge of his coffee cup. There was an air of quiet intensity about him, like he was lost in thoughts that only he could understand. I settled into a chair a few tables away from him, pulling out a book from my bag to pass the time while I waited for the rain to subside. But I couldn't help but steal glances at him, intrigued by the aura of mystery that surrounded him. As if sensing my gaze, he looked up and caught my eye. He smiled, and in that moment, it felt like a spark had been lit. I smiled back, a little shyly, feeling a flutter of something I couldn't quite name. Minutes later, he approached my table. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice deep and smooth, with a hint of something playful in his tone. His eyes twinkled with a warmth that was both inviting and disarming. "Sure," I replied, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. My heart was racing, and I hoped he couldn't see how nervous I felt. "I'm Ryan," he said, extending a hand. His grip was firm but gentle, and his touch sent a jolt of electricity through me. "I'm Emma," I said, smiling despite myself. From that moment, it was as if the world outside the coffee shop ceased to exist. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, weaving through topics like music, travel, and our favorite books. He had an easy charm about him, a confidence that was tempered by a genuine curiosity about the world and the people in it. I found myself laughing at his stories and sharing my own, feeling a connection that was both exhilarating and terrifying in its intensity. We spent hours in that coffee shop, long after the rain had stopped and the sun had begun to set. By the time we finally exchanged numbers and said our goodbyes, I felt like I had known him for years, not hours. There was a promise of something more in the air, a sense that this was just the beginning of a story that was waiting to unfold. Over the next few weeks, Ryan and I became inseparable. Our dates were a whirlwind of excitement and adventure. We explored hidden corners of the city, attended live music gigs, and spent lazy afternoons lounging in parks, talking about everything and nothing. Ryan had a way of making every moment feel special, like he was opening up a new world just for us to share. But as our relationship deepened, I began to notice that Ryan had his dark moments too. There were times when he would retreat into himself, his moods shifting like storm clouds on the horizon. I tried to be understanding, to give him space when he needed it, but it was hard not to feel hurt when he would suddenly become distant or irritable for reasons I couldn't fathom. I chalked it up to the complexities of his personality, telling myself that everyone had their ups and downs. It wasn't until one night, a few months into our relationship, that I got a glimpse of the depths of Ryan's struggles. We were at a party, a lively affair filled with music and laughter. I had wandered off to get us some drinks when I noticed Ryan in a corner, talking to a group of people I didn't recognize. They were passing around small bags of white powder, and my heart sank as I realized what was happening. I had known that Ryan occasionally used drugs recreationally, something I was uncomfortable with but had reluctantly accepted, but seeing it up close like this was a shock. When I confronted him later, he brushed it off, insisting that it was just a bit of fun and that I had nothing to worry about. I wanted to believe him, to trust that he had it under control, but a nagging feeling in the back of my mind told me that there was more to it than he was letting on. As the months passed, that nagging feeling grew stronger. Ryan's mood swings became more pronounced, and his temper flared more frequently. He would get angry over the smallest things if I suggested he might be experiencing anxiety, if I refused to drive him home late at night because I had an early start the next day, or if I spent a weekend away with friends. He started breaking up with me regularly, usually for a day or two, only to come back with apologies and promises to change. It was a cycle that left me feeling emotionally drained and confused. I loved Ryan, but I couldn't understand why he treated me this way. Every time we reconciled, I hoped that things would get better, but the reprieve never lasted long. The anger and the breakups became a pattern, a storm that we couldn't seem to escape. The breaking point came about 10 months ago. After yet another explosive argument, this time because I had dared to suggest that he might need professional help, I broke up with him for what I thought was the final time. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to protect my own sanity, to find some peace in my life. Ryan, however, wasn't ready to let me go. In the aftermath of our breakup, he dropped a bombshell that changed everything. He was addicted to drugs. I was stunned. I had known that he used drugs occasionally, but I had no idea that it was this bad. He admitted that he had been using 3 to 4 times a week, far more than the occasional party use I had assumed. It was a revelation that turned my world upside down. Suddenly, his erratic behavior, his mood swings, his anger, it all made a horrible kind of sense. I felt a mix of anger, betrayal, and overwhelming sadness. How could he have kept something so significant from me? How could I have been so blind? I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to run as far away from him as possible, to protect myself from the chaos that his addiction had brought into my life. But another part of me still loved him, still wanted to believe that he could change. In the months that followed, I tried to move on. I focused on my job, spent time with friends, and started making plans to move in with my sister once my lease with my roommate ended. It was a way to regain some control over my life, to find a stable, supportive environment where I could heal from the emotional roller coaster that my relationship with Ryan had become. But then, 4 months ago, Ryan reached out to me again. He told me that he had been off drugs since our breakup, that he had finally taken responsibility for his actions, and that he wanted another chance. He promised me that things would be different this time, that he had changed. I was skeptical. After everything we had been through, how could I trust him again? But the part of me that still cared about him, that remembered the good times, wanted to believe that he could change. So, I decided to give our relationship another shot. For the first few weeks, things seemed to be improving. Ryan was calmer, more present, and more attentive. He wasn't lashing out at me or breaking up with me every time we had a disagreement. I thought maybe, just maybe, we were turning a corner. But it wasn't long before the old patterns started to resurface. I could see the telltale signs of his drug use creeping back in. He would disappear for hours, or even days at a time. His moods became increasingly erratic. And his apartment, when I saw it, was a disaster zone. Trash piled up, dishes went unwashed, and the place had an air of neglect that was impossible to ignore. I tried to talk to him about it, to get him to see that he needed help, but he would deny everything, minimizing his drug use and brushing off my concerns. When I confronted him, he would get defensive and angry, accusing me of not trusting him and undermining his efforts to stay clean. A month ago, things took a turn for the worse. Ryan nearly overdosed, a terrifying wake-up call that shook him to his core. He finally confided in his mom about his drug problem, something he had kept hidden from her for years. He also admitted to me just how bad things had gotten. He was scared, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of hope that he might actually be ready to make a real change. He claimed he had been clean since the overdose, and I could see the difference in him. He was more stable, more focused, and he seemed genuinely committed to staying sober. Despite these positive changes, I remained cautious. I knew from everything I had read and heard about addiction that relapse was a very real possibility, especially so soon after an attempt to quit. Ryan, however, was adamant that he could handle it on his own. He refused professional help, insisting that he didn't need therapy or rehab, that he could do it by sheer willpower alone. This worried me, but I didn't want to push him too hard and risk driving him back to drugs. And then came the issue of living arrangements. During our breakup, I had made plans to move in with my sister, and I was determined to follow through with them. It felt like the right move for me, a way to establish some stability and support in my life after the chaos of the past 2 years. But Ryan was furious when I told him I was sticking to this plan. He couldn't understand why I didn't want to move in with him instead. He said he was struggling financially and needed me to help with his bills and rent. He accused me of putting everyone else above him, of not supporting him when he needed me the most. His words stung, but I held my ground. I tried to explain that I wasn't ready to live with him, not until he had been sober for a significant amount of time and had proven that he could maintain stability in his life. I needed to see consistency before I could feel comfortable making such a big commitment. He didn't take it well. He lashed out, telling me that any normal girlfriend would choose to live with her boyfriend over her sister, that my refusal to move in with him showed a lack of faith in his ability to stay clean. It was like he couldn't see past his own needs to understand mine. As I sat there on my bed, staring at his latest message, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. I loved Ryan, or at least I loved the version of him I had fallen for in that coffee shop 2 years ago. But I also knew that I couldn't keep putting my own well-being on the line for him. I needed to take care of myself, to build a life that wasn't constantly overshadowed by his addiction and erratic behavior. Taking a deep breath, I picked up my phone and typed out a reply. I told him that I loved him, that I was proud of the progress he had made, but that I needed to see more consistency before I could consider living with him. I explained that moving in with my sister was something I had committed to, and that it was important for me to have a stable, supportive environment while he worked on his recovery. I hoped he would understand, but I also knew that he might not. Hitting send, I felt a mixture of relief and dread. I didn't know what the future held for us, but I knew that I had to be true to myself and my own needs. I couldn't let Ryan's anger and accusations sway me from what I knew was the right decision for me. The next few days were a blur of activity as I threw myself into apartment hunting with my sister. We visited a dozen places, comparing notes and debating the merits of each one. It was a welcome distraction from the turmoil with Ryan, a chance to focus on something positive and forward-looking. We finally found a place that felt just right, a cozy 2-bedroom apartment with lots of natural light, a small balcony, and a kitchen that would be perfect for our weekend cooking experiments. As we signed the lease and started making plans for the move, I felt a sense of hope and excitement that I hadn't felt in a long time. It was a new beginning, a chance to build a life that was mine, without the constant shadow of Ryan's addiction hanging over me. Ryan, meanwhile, was not taking things well. He continued to bombard me with messages, alternating between pleading for me to move in with him and accusing me of abandoning him. It was heartbreaking to see him so distraught, but I knew that I couldn't give in. Moving in with him now, when he was still so early in his recovery and refusing professional help, would only set us up for more heartache and chaos. One evening, as I was packing up the last of my things, Ryan showed up at my parents' house, where I had been staying temporarily. He looked haggard and desperate, his eyes red and puffy from what I guessed was a lack of sleep. My heart ached for him, but I steeled myself, knowing that I had to be firm. "Emma, please," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I need you. I can't do this without you." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my own emotions in check. "Ryan, I love you, but I can't move in with you right now. You need to focus on your recovery, and I need some time to build a stable life for myself. Living together would only complicate things and make it harder for both of us." He shook his head, tears welling up in his eyes. "You're choosing your sister over me. You don't believe in me. How am I supposed to stay clean if you're not there to support me?" "It's not about choosing her over you," I said gently. "It's about making sure that we both have the best chance of success. You need to prove to yourself that you can do this on your own, without relying on me or anyone else. And I need to be in a place where I can support you without sacrificing my own well-being." Ryan looked at me for a long moment, his expression a mix of pain and resignation. Finally, he nodded, wiping away the tears that had started to fall. "I get it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't like it, but I get it. I hope you know how much I love you." "I know," I said, reaching out to take his hand. "And I love you too. That's why I'm doing this. I want you to succeed. I want us to have a real chance at a future together. But we can't do that if we're both falling apart." We stood there for a moment, holding each other's gaze, before Ryan finally turned and walked away. Watching him go was one of the hardest things I had ever done, but I knew it was the right decision. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into my new life with my sister. We spent our weekends exploring our new neighborhood, trying out local restaurants, and decorating our apartment to make it feel like home. It was a time of healing and rediscovery for me, a chance to remember who I was outside of my relationship with Ryan. I kept in touch with Ryan, but our conversations were more measured, more focused on his recovery and less on our relationship. He was attending support groups and working on building a new routine, and while there were still struggles and setbacks, he was making progress. I was proud of him, and I made sure to let him know that, even from a distance. As the months passed, I started to see a different side of myself, a stronger, more resilient version of me that I hadn't known existed. I was learning to set boundaries, to prioritize my own needs, and to find joy in the simple things. It wasn't easy, and there were still days when I missed Ryan terribly, but I knew that I was on the right path. One evening, as I was sitting on our balcony, watching the sunset over the city, I received a message from Ryan. He told me that he had been accepted into a rehabilitation program and that he was ready to take the next step in his recovery. It was a bittersweet moment knowing that he was finally getting the help he needed, but also realizing that our paths were diverging in ways I hadn't anticipated. I replied with words of encouragement, telling him how proud I was and that I believed in his ability to overcome his addiction. As I had said, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. It wasn't the ending I had envisioned for us, but it was a step forward, a sign that we were both finding our own ways to heal and grow. Looking out at the horizon, I took a deep breath and allowed myself to embrace the uncertainty of the future. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew that I had the strength to face it one day at a time, and as the sun dipped below the skyline, casting a warm glow over the city, I felt a flicker of hope for the first time in a long time, a hope that, no matter what, everything would be okay.